Hi everyone, Roy here. I thought I'd pop in with a catch-up on my reading this month. So this is a month of two events, two great events. One is Victober, celebrating Victorian literature, and the other is Occult Detective October. This is why I've got new little mascots here, shifting away from Lego this time. So I've got Victorian era Wonder Woman and John Constantine. So who isn't a cult detective? Right, so yes, reading stuff for both of those, and in a sort of senses-shattering crossover, this book, Lady Mary's Experiences, a novel, counts for both. So it's by a woman called Ada Maria Jennings, who's sometimes also credited as Mrs. Robert Jocelyn or Ada Maria Jocelyn. So counts for two prompts because she was writing in the Victorian era, one of her 19 novels. Pre-1960, clearly, that's one of the weeks for Occult Detective October. And also, The Challenge of Elizabeth in Victober is reader work by an underrated Victorian woman writer. And I'd say she's certainly neglected. Whether underrated or not is, you'll have to decide really. So I came across this book in Tim Prazzle's incredibly useful website about occult detective fiction, and he's got an article on there called The Hurtful Finale of Ada M. Jocelyn's otherwise interesting occult detective novel. So I didn't read the article first because if it's going to talk about the hurtful finale, the possibility of spoilers seemed pretty high really. So I thought I'd take the risk and read it anyway. Bought one of these British Library facsimile editions with their charmless covers, but faithfully reproduced contents, and yeah, read the book. Pretty much enjoyed it actually. I think I survived the hurtful finale. I would describe it as a mixture of light romance and ghost story. Probably the supernatural elements are a bit more effective than the romance. Maybe I've just read too many things like that, I don't know. So what makes it an occult detective story? Okay, Lady Mary, nickname Molly, she's had a couple of ghostly experiences just sort of on the fly. You know, she's seen ghosts that other people can't see, believes that she is a sensitive empath, that kind of thing, you know, so she's got this sort of aspect of mediumship about her. So much so that she wants to take it further. So coming across a haunted house that is to let, she wants to rent this house and live in it and see the ghost and perhaps lay the ghost. So that's reckless, impulsive behaviour for a young woman, but she's very, very, very driven and won't be said. So she's wealthy, young aristocrat widow, and she's got a pal called Veronica Lawrence who is great. She's very practical. She sorts lots of things out for her chum. They ride around on bicycles, so it's got a bit of a new woman flavour about it, you know, with their sort of independence. Veronica carries a pistol, which is awesome, and has a dog called Reckless. And everyone's telling her, don't buy the house, don't buy the house. Looking into it, it seems that the haunting is a thing where people can't sleep. You know, you can't get a wink of sleep, but no one can describe, except in very vague terms, what the haunting actually is. That's pretty interesting. Turns out it's owned by somebody she knows, another aristocrat who she used to have a thing with. He's certainly got a thing for her. And he's also got a brother who sort of works as a kind of estate manager. So there's all sorts of, there's the romantic complications and the endless kind of don't rent the house. Obviously, she does rent the house. She fills it with furniture, and they have the experiences. They confront the ghost, and it's pretty good. The horrifying bits are suitably what's the word, unsettling, and the characters are good. I'd say it lags a bit in the sort of second half. You kind of wish they'd just get on and see the ghost, and resolve the romantic complications. I would say Lady Mary and Veronica would make an excellent pair of occult detectives, and they could have further adventures on their bicycles, etc. Being these kind of new women. But that doesn't look like that's how it's going to turn out, which is probably the hurtful finale that Tim Prazzle talks about. But I think, they might get over that and get back in the saddle and hunt more ghosts, or simply encounter more. So that was a pretty good read. New writer to me. Prompts all over the place for the 2 monthly events. What else have I been reading? Well, there's Hannah's challenge. The challenge of Hannah is read a Victorian work that discusses education. So for that, I'm reading a narrative poem by Tennyson called The Princess, which involves a women's university being set up in a kind of a medieval fantasy type of world, really. There actually is some supernatural stuff in it as well, so it sort of counts for my own challenge for this, which is read a Victorian work of fantasy. So I'll circle back to that once I've finished it, but I'm enjoying that. It's not a quick read, but the language is fantastic, and I love that story, and I've come across it before. So yes, we'll get back to that in a bit. Back to Occult Detectives. There's a week of post 1960 is the prompt. So there I've been looking at a new to me book that's first in a series. I knew the author, Liz Williams, science fiction author, who I think I've met a couple of times, met at a convention. She's got a shop in Glastonbury. We saw her there as well. Got a signed book. So yeah, Liz Williams, and the book is called Snake Agent, and the main character is Inspector Chen. So it's near future science fiction. And in this world, there's a lovely science fiction idea that cities can be franchised. So it's taking place in Singapore 3 of 6 replicated Singapores that people live in. And in this near future, in a, I guess, Chinese cosmology, heaven and hell operate with the demons and everything, but they've modernised, so you can email them, and there are sort of bureaucratic processes for people dying and being allocated to where they're going to go and ending up there and that sort of thing. So there's sort of commerce between them. People don't necessarily like that, and Inspector Chen has connections with the underworld, which make him a bit of an outsider for the rest of his sort of police pals. And there's a mystery to do with a ghost of a young girl that's ended up in the wrong place. And that's that's something that's disapproved of by everybody. So he seems to be teaming up with a demon to solve this mystery. So great so far. Again, I'll report in on that. In fact, I've got not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 current occult detective series to tell you about in a future video. Back in Victober, not leaving the occult behind, the challenge of Milena is to spin a colour wheel. Pick a Victorian book with a cover that primarily features that colour. And it can be any edition, you don't necessarily need to own it already. So I got red. Look at this, that's plenty red. It's a book by Margaret Oliphant. It's a British Library collection, edited by Mike Ashley. So it's called The Open Door and Other Stories of the Seen and Unseen. And it's all work by Margaret Oliphant, who, as it happens, is the author of the fabulous Victober group read, Hester, which Jennie and I are both listening to in audio and really, really loving it. And I'd say on the strength of this and this, Oliphant is becoming one of my favourite authors, really. She's just amazing. So the story I've read so far is one that I've heard of. Some people cite it as being there, you know, putting it in top 10s or top 5s or top whatevers of supernatural stories. It's called The Library Window. And it's the kind of supernatural story where it's not your traditional ghost. Maybe it isn't even a ghost. It's strangeness. It reminded me of a much more recent author, Robert Aikman. I think he called his work strange stories. You don't necessarily 100% know what's going on. You know, it certainly isn't a sort of, aha, yes, the old Duke was buried under the lawn. That's why the ghost's appearing. It's nothing as closed as that. So basically, there's a young woman who spends a lot of time in her aunt's house. I think it's in Edinburgh, and likes to sort of curl up in a window seat reading. Who wouldn't? On the other side of the road, there's another building where there's a strange, ambiguous window. And some say it's not really a window, it's just been painted on, or maybe it was walled up years ago when they used to have the window tax. Probably be coming back soon. And some say, no, it's a real window. And, you know, there's the old people who mill around in her aunt's house talk about it. And they're pretty weird as well. And after a while, she can see into it. She sees the room sometimes. Other times, it does just look like a painted facade. She sees a person in it. I won't say any more, just to say, if you want to read a classic, unsettling supernatural tale that's not the same old, that's a great one to read. And this looks like a brilliant collection as well. And it's red. What more could you want? Okay, where else we at? Well, The Challenge of Catherine. Read a Victorian book that has a connection to Jane Austen. Jane Austen, of course, not Victorian. So what might that be? Well, she was certainly talked about and read in Victorian times. She sort of came back into fashion and maybe went out of fashion again. I picked up this Letters to Dead Authors book by Andrew Lang. Andrew Lang, there's his logo, or perhaps brand. Perhaps his cattle had this brand on them. So I know Andrew Lang a bit from, I think he collaborated with H. Rider Haggard. And of course, his fairy story collections are pretty well known. So this Letters to Dead Authors thing, it's what it says. They're satirical pieces, really. He writes to the author, somewhat in their style. It reads at first as if he's being really critical of Jane Austen. How dare he? You are not a very popular author. Your volumes are not found in gaudy covers on every bookstall, or if found, are not perused with avidity by the Emmas and Catherines of our generation. So he's comparing Jane Austen's work and characters with the sort of thing people were reading when this was published, which was towards the end of the century. So let's see, Mr. J.W.G. Bond owned it in 1895, and it came out in 1892. So you'd had sensation fiction, you currently had the decadence, there's all sorts of exciting things going on. Meanwhile, there's these prim and proper, even prim and dreary stories that people aren't reading. As for heroines, for example, you chose ladies like Emma and Elizabeth and Catherine, women remarkable neither for the brilliance nor for the degradation of their birth, women wrapped up in their own and the parish's concerns, ignorant of evil, as it seems, and unacquainted with vain yearnings and interesting doubts. Who can engage his fancy with their matchmakings and the conduct of their affections, when so many daring and dazzling heroines approach and solicit his regard? Here, like on the bookstalls of today, here are princesses dressed in white velvet, stamped with golden fleur-de-lis, ladies with hearts of ice and lips of fire, who count their roubles by the million, their lovers by the score, and even their husbands very often in figures of some arithmetical importance. With these are the immaculate daughters of itinerant Italian musicians, maids whose souls are unsoiled amidst the contaminations of our streets. He also then says she could have written her stories with some of her minor characters more to the fore. So the ones who do have rather sensational things happening to them, why don't we get most of the book about that? You erred, it cannot be denied. With your eyes open, knowing Lydia and Kitty so intimately as you did, why did you make of them almost insignificant characters? With Lydia for a heroine you might have gone far. And had you devoted 3 volumes and the chief of your time to the passions of Kitty, you might have held your own even now in the circulating library. How Liddy, perched on a corner of a roof, first beheld her Wickham. How on her challenge he climbed up by a ladder to her side. How they kissed, caressed, swung on gates together, met at odd seasons in strange places and finally eloped. In fact, madam, as you were born before analysis came in, or passion, or realism, or naturalism, or irreverence, or religious open-mindedness, you really cannot hope to rival your literary sisters in the minds of a perplexed generation. Then he finally comes clean and says how great the Jane Austen books are. Ah, madam, what a relief it is, after all of that new thought and what have you. Madam, what a relief it is to come back to your witty volumes and forget the follies of today and those of Mr. Collins and Mrs. Bennet. How fine, nay, how noble is your art in its delicate reserve, never insisting, never forcing the note, never pushing the sketch into the caricature. Dear books, we say with Miss Thackeray, dear books, bright, sparkling with wit and animation, in which the homely heroines charm, the dull hours fly, and the very bores are enchanting. So, if she read to the end, the shade of Jane Austen would hopefully realise that he was on her side, and not come and haunt him in an occult fashion. But if that did happen, Andrew Lang could of course have called on an occult detective to come and help him out to resolve the issue. Okay, that's pretty much where I'm up to. I'm currently reading stories from the current issue of Occult Detective magazine, bumper issue. So probably make a video with that in as well. And I think the next Victober thing I'll be doing will be when I crack open this baby, a Pearson's magazine from early in 1900. For The Challenge of Katie, which is to read something that is not a novel. And I'll be accompanying that with some Victorian teas, so it'll be magazine reading, taste testing the teas. Okay, back soon with those things and probably something else as well.